Hello, everybody. We're going to get started now, even as more people are joining the webinar. My name is Denise Peck. I'm from the MBA class of 1985 from the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and I'm also the founding president of the GSB Asian Alumni Chapter. Along with Chris Lowe from the MBA class of 91 and the events chair of our chapter, our panelists and moderators, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of our participants, students, alumni, staff, friends, and guests. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. To those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we're an alumni network of Pan-Asian ethnicities, East Asian, South Asian, and Southeast Asian, and/or affinity. Our goal is to develop a global community of GSB alumni to provide mutual inspiration, learning and support, visible leadership, and solidarity around issues of common interests. I'd like to thank the Asian Alumni Leadership Team and the GSB Alumni Relations staff for their partnership and support in making this webinar a reality today. Our coming together to discuss the topic common interest for the AAPI community is both unifying and potentially cathartic. The theme of tonight's discussion is about translating the anger, fear, and frustrations we have felt with the escalating anti-Asian violence and turning that into productive actions and solutions. Just recently, the Stop AAPI Hate organization updated that there had been over 6,600 hate incidents reported during a one-year period ending March 31st of this year. These incidents include verbal harassment, shunning, physical assault, and civil rights violations. We also know that there's significant underreporting of anti-Asian hate incidents. And recently, a nonprofit organization called Leading Asian Americans to Unite for Change, or LAUNCH, co-founded by GSB alumnus Norman Chen, has conducted a national study on the attitudes and perceptions of Asian Americans, who number 23 million in the United States today. According to the study, nearly 80% of Asian Americans say they do not feel respected and are discriminated against in the US. Just earlier today, President Biden signed a bipartisan bill to address COVID-19 hate crimes, the first legislative action against attacks on people of Asian descent. Sadly and realistically, however, nothing that we will discuss tonight will immediately prevent the next violent attack on the Asian community, but it is an opportunity for us to discuss biases and discriminations in other insidious forms that many of us have personally experienced, and get inspirational ideas from 3 Asian business leaders on actions they are taking to counter them. Before we get started with the panel, we're very honored that Dean Jonathan Levin of the Graduate School of Business has joined us, and he will share his perspectives for a few minutes. Let me now welcome Dean Levin.
Thank you, Denise, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining this event. This event is sponsored by the GSB Asian Alumni Chapter, and it's a continuation of the chapter's leadership webinar series. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from today's panelists, Deb Liu, and Debby Soo, and having this opportunity to also to celebrate Asian and Pacific Island Heritage Month. As you know, this month is a celebration of the accomplishments and contributions of Asians and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. While I have the opportunity, I want to commend to all of you a website that was put together by a number of our faculty and staff and crowdsourced from across all of Stanford University. They put together a month-long learning journey that has dozens of contributors and is really a beautifully designed and executed project to share information, celebrate cultures, and also to highlight the challenges of racism and discrimination that are going to be discussed tonight. This month and this webinar is also an opportunity for us to acknowledge and to speak out against the discrimination and violence that we have been seeing against Asian Americans. And this is a wave of violence that has escalated since the beginning of the pandemic. It's a reminder of a longer history of discrimination in the country, and it cannot and should not be tolerated in any way, and it demands a collective response. And I was very pleased today to see President Biden sign an anti-Asian hate crime bill, one that notably had bipartisan support. The COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act is going to direct resources to help law enforcement officers improve reporting of bias-driven incidents and also to expedite the review of pandemic-related hate crimes. This is a very important step at the national level. I think one of the things I hope we're going to be discussing tonight is also the work that we need to do within our own organizations and at the local level to combat bias and to foster greater inclusivity. And I wanted to take this opportunity to just say one or two things about what has been happening at this GSB, where over the last year, there has been, in many ways, among our alumni, among our students, among our faculty, among our staff, a real surge, a wave of interest and desire to take action to combat discrimination in all of its forms, both at our campus, but also across the country, and to use the challenge of the last year as an opportunity to really help the country move forward. And you're going to hear about some of that effort tonight when you hear, for example, from what Deb Liu will talk about the work that he has been doing. And one of the things that we have done over the last year was to, as part of our action plan for racial equity, was to organize an alumni task force to bring together a number of our alumni to have them think about ways in which our alumni could work with the school to advance racial equity in the country. And I particularly want to thank Denise Peck, who has been serving on that task force, for the work that she's been doing. It's very, very much appreciated. And I'll just say I have been really inspired over the last year by the leadership that has been shown by so many of our alumni from the GSB and so many Stanford alumni, including the folks who are on this panel tonight, to organize Asian American business leaders to pledge their support to working to combat prejudice and violence against the Asian American community, and more broadly to advance having a more just and equitable country for everyone who lives here. So thank you all for attending this event, and thank you particularly to the panelists and to the organizers of the event. And really look forward to hearing what you all have to say.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for your insights and efforts to support our community. It's very much appreciated, and thank you for joining. Now, let me introduce our moderators for the panel. Tina Shah-Paikaday is Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Services at Russell Reynolds Associate, an executive search and leadership advisory firm. She graduated from Stanford's MBA program in 1998 when she served as co-chair of the South Asian Student Association. She has been an active member of the Asian community as a charter member of the Indus Entrepreneurs and founding president of the network of Indian professionals and Indus women leaders. I'd also like to introduce our Q&A moderator, Adrian Kwok. Adrian is an associate partner at McKinsey & Company based in New York. He co-founded McKinsey's Asian Employee Resource Group almost a decade ago and continues to lead it globally. Since graduating from the GSB in 2016, he's published research on the bamboo ceiling and COVID-19's impact on the Asian American community. So tonight's format is as follows. Tina will spend time with each panelist in a short one-on-one interview for a few minutes. Then she will bring them all back for a roundtable, and then we'll get to your questions. We've already received some questions in advance of tonight's event, but you may still pose your questions in the Q&A box anytime, and Adrian will be monitoring the box and will raise the questions to the speakers a little later in the program. So with that, Tina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Denise. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. And as you talked about, and as Dean Levin talked about, the session is really about racism that's been experienced by the Asian community in the wake of the pandemic. And especially recently leading to the shooting deaths of 6 Asian American women in Atlanta. As you both mentioned, this is not a new pattern, and it really does remind me of the aftermath of 9/11 when hate crimes targeted more of the South Asian community. So what we're here to talk about tonight is that successful Asians have stood up to speak out against the discrimination with an open letter to the Wall Street Journal. And as a result of the leadership of many of our panelists here today, on April 19th, the Wall Street Journal published an article on Asians in the workplace with some of the following points highlighted that we'll discuss on the panel. They talked about covering and giving examples of Asians going to get, saying they're going to get a coffee rather than really saying they're going to get a bubble tea. They talked about technical expertise and Asians being expected to be seen in tech jobs rather than in sales jobs. They talked about keeping your head down and working hard and achieving the American dream by keeping your head down and not by being seen. And the myth of the model minority, being excluded from corporate diversity plans as perceived to be doing well, but actually less likely to be in the C-suite, not only compared to whites, but also compared to Latinos and Blacks, because they are perceived to be good workers, but not assertive enough to be leaders. And so as we talk about some of these issues, it's really my pleasure to introduce to you the panelists who are leading an effort to not only speak up and speak out, but also to raise funds, to really do something about being more vocal and less silent in a country that's been formed by immigrants. So our panelists today include Deb Liu, Debby Soo, and Deb Liu. First, I'd like to introduce Deb Liu, who is a veteran in the technology industry, having worked for over 2 decades at big tech companies, including Yahoo, Apple, Cisco, and eBay, and founding 2 startups as well. In 2011, he created a community called the Asian American Founders Circle, which inspired the launch of Hyphen Capital, a syndicate focused on investing in Asian American founders. He most recently started a movement with a letter condemning hate crimes against Asians, and this was signed by over 1,000 prominent business leaders and published as a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal. Dave received his bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School and his MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Tina. Good to be here.
I'll next introduce Debby Soo. Debby is the CEO of OpenTable, bringing expertise in product-first commercialization, strategic partnerships, and international growth. She has spent the past 10 years building Kayak's travel commercial team, establishing the AAPI business, and then overseeing global business development for both Kayak and for OpenTable. Prior to Kayak, Debby worked at Google's Strategic Partnerships Group and started her career as a financial analyst in Citibank's M&A Group, focusing on deals in Greater China. She holds a BA and MA in East Asian Studies with a minor in economics from Stanford University and has an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management. She splits her time between New England and the Bay Area with her husband and son. Welcome, Debby.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Terrific. And last but not least, I'd also like to introduce Debby Liu, who joined Ancestry in March of 2021 as president and CEO and a member of the company's board of directors. Prior to joining Ancestry, Deb was a senior executive at Facebook, where she created and led Facebook's marketplace. Prior to Facebook, she spent several years in roles at both PayPal and eBay, including leading the integration for 2 products. Deb serves on the board of Intuit, and she's a seed investor and advisor at several startups. She holds several payments and commerce-related patents, and Deb received a BS in civil engineering from Duke University and an MBA from Stanford's Graduate School of Business. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Terrific. I'm first going to start with an interview with you, Dave. As we think about some of the things that you've done recently to help Asians speak up, I'd like to mention some of the research on cultural differences. As we think about the research that's been done in Asia versus the US, in terms of preferences for power distance, we find that those in the US have a lower tolerance and those in Asia have a higher tolerance for hierarchy. And in addition to that, the US scores lower on, the US scores higher on individualism than in Asia, which scores low, demonstrating this differential preference for the individual versus the group. And the reason I bring this up is that in our leadership research, we find that leaders and CEOs in Asia are less likely to be as heroic and galvanizing as US CEOs. And yet, what I'm very intrigued by, Dave, is that you took the courage to write in letter, get it signed by thousands of Asian CEOs, board members, other business members and allies. And signatories included Tony Zhu of DoorDash, Kenneth Lin of Credit Karma, Eric Yuan of Zoom, and your fellow panelists. My question to you is, what inspired you to write this letter in the Wall Street Journal and begin our community of speaking up here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was born in Queens. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm as American as anyone else. So that Western influence is very deeply ingrained in me, alongside all of the Taiwanese influence I have from my parents. I think, you know, we have the fortune of having both worlds and being kind of straddling both worlds and having the Western kind of individualism, but also kind of the understanding of the value of community. So, you know, I think for me, when I wrote the letter, I was inspired by the fact that, I mean, I'm currently in Taiwan, and there's, you know, a lot of other kind of the diaspora that's here right now that are just, you know, amazing, you know, Asian Americans that are here also during COVID, you know, with their families, and they've done so much for the country. When I was out here, it's funny, I felt anger I mean, over the past year, I've been seeing these videos on my social media feeds and constant, you know, elderly being attacked and other people being attacked. And I asked my friends who are non-Asian if they had been aware of any of this. And until the Atlanta shootings, they had not really realized that this was happening. But for many of us, this was our daily, you know, realization for the past year, that, you know, people continue to see us as foreigners, no matter what happened, that they place blame on like Asians for the virus, and that some 85-year-old Thai man would be somehow involved in creating a virus that spread all over the world. I mean, it was both ridiculous, but really sad to see, and that someone like that could feel so unsafe. But more importantly, I mean, I was worried about my mom, my family, and I think a lot of us were, and I think we didn't know what to do. Besides watching looking out over our shoulders, we had to worry about our parents who, you know, they couldn't even leave the house, and we'd have to deliver groceries to them and things that we shouldn't have to do in neighborhoods that they have lived in for decades. So it just seemed that when it broke, I mean, it was the last straw when the Atlanta shooting happened, and I felt like I had to say something. You know, Debbie reached out, and other friends have reached out and said, you know, what are we going to do? And I had written a letter, just putting down my emotions and feelings and frustrations as someone who, you know, grew up in America and felt every right to feel just as American as the people who were attacking us, and just being so frustrated that we even have to deal with this right now, amidst all the other things that we have to deal with, and the mental health and the burden that we all are bearing by being afraid for our families, ourselves, or, you know, not just from COVID, but from being attacked. So, you know, I'm very fortunate that through my work building community with Asian American founders and executives, that I was able to rally a lot of my friends in my network to sign this letter. And, you know, we said, hey, let's publish this somewhere where people see it. And I have friends who said, why would you give money to the Wall Street Journal? Like this is like a, you know, there's no point, and you're just wasting dollars. But when we finally published it, it became a visual symbol for so many that needed the courage to see others stand up, to see people that, you know, they look up to, or their peers, like, you know, Eric and Tony, who've done really well, stand up and say something. Because for so long we've self-censored our Asian heritage, you know, on LinkedIn and everywhere else we're posting, because we don't want to stand out. You know, like like many of us been raised, we were supposed to keep our heads down and, you know, not cause a fuss, don't rock the boat. And I think that's where things changed with this. I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and many of us said, you know, we're tired of this, and we're not gonna, you know, take it anymore. So yeah, that's basically what kind of drove me to write the letter.
Now that's great, but, you know, I think it wasn't that easy to get all of the signatures. As I understand it, many had to check with their employers before they received permission to actually sign on to the letter. And now, you know, many leaders have come together to form TAF, the Asian American Fund, which is run by a dear old friend, Sonal Shah. And my question to you is, Dave, how have you been able to, as you think about the audience here, how have you been able to balance activism with your professional career? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think for many of us, it's very, we have to be careful, and we've been, again, this is part of us being raised to be careful, to be very sensitive to, you know, rocking the boat. And I think that's something that we have to somehow get out of our system, because, you know, that's how, again, the individualistic Western way of becoming a strong CEO, and, you know, the proverbial, the stereotypical white male leader doesn't care as much, and they're willing to be bold and not be afraid of what others think. But for us, we were raised to, kind of not be that way, not to stick out. And I think for myself, I think I was kind of tired of having to self-censor, and it was part of it was, I've raised millions of dollars for my current company, and for the last year during Black Lives Matter, I actually found myself deleting a lot of posts that I would have posted about Black lives and social justice, because I was afraid that an employee would sue us because I was biased because I was fighting for Black lives. And these are the types of things that it's really hard, especially for Debbie and Deb, who are high profile CEOs. Like, this is not easy to do because you have employees. The cancel culture is real. There are a lot of people that you can offend, and legal things you have to worry about. And I think that's what actually held back a lot of folks from signing, because they weren't afraid if they were allowed to or they were able to, and their legal counsel or general counsel told them they can't sign something, and their CEOs told them not to. So I think we've been kind of pushed into to fear being outspoken, and it's really sad because I've seen a lot of HR departments actually threaten some employees who wanted to speak out on these things. And I think that's I think it's more people getting conviction of, hey, I don't want to work at a place like this if I can't speak out on who I am or be who I am at my workplace. Like, why am I even here? So there's been a lot of hard discussions because of this letter that it forced people to have with their workplace and their kind of the managers and leaders. But it's also led to amazing discussions where they've gotten the CEOs themselves to sign as allies, and they open up hearts and minds to say we should be included in the conversation. The squeak is, like, I don't think most people know this, but out of $100 from foundations donated to Asian American causes, 20 cents, $100, 20 cents goes to Asian American causes. And at the end of the day, it's the squeakiest wheel gets the grease, and we are not squeaky at all. We do not say anything. We do not complain. We do not make it a point to let people know that we're dealing with stuff too. And having ERGs and workplaces where people are actually sharing their personal stories, so their colleagues are made aware of what we're going through. Most importantly, what Asian women go through in the workplace. I think so many are shocked to hear the things that happen, and I think that's a good thing. I think the fact that we've allowed this stuff to slide for so long is the problem. And so, as I say, like, I don't want to be the silent minority anymore. I think we need to have our voices heard. So it is a tough balance, but I think people need to speak out more. And if they're in the wrong place for that, then they need to go somewhere else. Because I think this is the mental burden of dealing with this stuff and holding it inside for too long is not healthy for anyone.
Dave, one last question for you before we turn to the topic that you're raising, especially with two Asian women CEOs on the panel here. I just wanted to talk about the lack of awareness of some of the issues that stem from a lot of the laws that exist in the U.S., as well as just the divide, or not the divide, but just the wide spectrum, right, of Asian Americans that live in this country that folks are not aware of. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this all, like, we all grew up seeing the Time magazine covers of whiz kids and the model minority myth, and how we've been portrayed as, the good minority, the ones that succeed. When historically, we were banned from coming to this country through exclusionary acts and legislation, and the ones that were allowed in were the ones who had graduate degrees and were coming for certain programs. So of course, those were going to excel, but they created the myth that all Asians are doing just fine and doing great. They're look at their incomes. Why can't you be more like Asian? Why can't other minorities be more like Asians? Using us as an example, when it really was just to create a wedge between us and other minorities, that it's constantly a zero-sum game, that we're competing for the scraps that are given to us. And so everyone's fighting each other. And that to me is really frustrating, because the narrative that we are all doing well and we're making, we have great jobs, we're making good incomes, it hurts us on both sides. From the top side, that we aren't doing as well as we thought, because if you look at the numbers from that Denise and Buck G have put together for Ascend, we see that there is a bamboo ceiling, and many of us are not able to get past a certain level in most corporations because we're not given a chance or given a seat at the table. I've heard tons of stories of people recently, friends who were CEOs and founders of their own companies, that were pushed out because they wanted white males to take their place to go public. And I think it's frustrating to hear that, but I know this happens all too often. And so, and I think this is the problem of, we're highly represented minorities at the employee level, but we can't get a seat at the table in the C-suite or the boardroom. And to me, that's that's unacceptable. That we can't get representation there. And on the flip side, on the low, if everyone keeps thinking that all Asians make great incomes and we're wealthy, that narrative is false too, because the poorest minorities in the country are actually Asian. Cambodian, Hmong, the communities are not doing nearly as well. They're actually on the bottom of the spectrum in terms of income. So the income disparity within Asians, by lumping us together as one monolith, as they have, with these hate crimes, it also does a disservice to us. And so this model minority myth needs to be broken from both ends, so that we don't have to fall. I mean, we've all fallen under prey to that ourselves, to believe that we're doing just fine. So let's not rock the boat and just keep our heads down and continue building railroads for other people while they make all the wealth off of us.
I like that, breaking the model myth minority on both ends. Let's for a moment shift to the C-suite within organizations, and just to double click a little bit on the statistics that you started to mention, Dave. Among S&P 500 companies, 3% of CEOs are Indian and 2% from other Asian descent, which is actually just on par with a 6% representation of the Asian population in the US workforce. However, Silicon Valley Asians are underrepresented in the C-suite relative to their representation in lower levels. In one famous company in the Valley, the Asians comprise 44% of the total workforce, compared to 25% of leadership positions. And then we see this statistic playing out in the management parity index that you referenced, that Denise and Buck have followed for quite some time, where they look at the ratio of managers to professionals in the tech industry. And while that ratio is 1.33 for whites and over 1 for Blacks and Hispanics, it's actually less than 1.72 for Asians. Now, as I turn to you, Debbie, you have navigated both the gender and race right to the C-suite, and I'd love to understand, as you navigated both gender and race, how would you describe your approach to being successful?
That's a heavy question, and I've been thinking about this since for the last few weeks. When I was growing up, I think my story is not unique. My parents, spoke Mandarin to me, Chinese to me at home. And when we were out in public, I grew up in the Bay Area, I was their translator of sorts, right? Like they could get by, but my English was, of native fluency. And I always felt very ashamed of that. Like that's not quite right. Like I felt really embarrassed. And so I think, when I was at Stanford as an undergrad, and Stanford has a sizable Asian American population, our student body. And as I came into my own professionally, I really started to embrace my Asianness and almost put it on display. I'd make sure when I was speaking on the phone at work to my mom, I talk a little bit louder than what's maybe appropriate. I was just on another panel for NBC. I ate yogurt with chopsticks, like silly stuff like that. I was there weren't that many Asian Americans at the companies that I worked with, the times that I was there. And I think over time, I was just, I started my career in finance. I was very savvy at navigating a world of white men, white heterosexual men. I mean, I was recently in Taiwan with Dave. Actually, I was only there for a few weeks, and there was one dinner that he had invited me to, which was just, Asian American leaders in Silicon Valley. So Dave was there, Steve Chen of YouTube was there, and a couple others. And I remember walking in, and there was, I only knew Dave, but I felt so comfortable, it was so easy to be in my skin. Like I didn't have to second guess what I was saying. I didn't have to read the room to figure out, okay, what group is this? How do I act? How do I conduct myself? It was, I was in a room with people with, shared experiences. And as I was leaving the dinner, I realized wow, is this what being a white, well-educated white guy in Silicon Valley feels like when you walk into any room and it's just that? So I've learned how to navigate, and you develop, or I've developed a thick skin about it. I kind of put it on display. I call it out, almost like I call out that I'm Asian before anyone else can call me out. like that. And as I've risen through the ranks, I've almost become less showy about it because I don't need to as much, right? I'm here. I'm at the helm of the company. Everyone can see what I look like. Like I don't want to be screaming Chinese in the middle of the office. But when I was coming up, there was definitely that element of I need to make sure that people see me and that they know that I'm Asian, that I'm Chinese American, that I speak Mandarin. You know, and as I've gotten more senior, I feel less of a need to have to do that.
I love that. I love the example of eating yogurt with the chopsticks to really signal, right, the heritage. I think we need to just be seen and be heard. And I think my next question is really about your business. As you think about addressing bias as the CEO of the organization, both in talent and in your products, what are you doing to eliminate bias at work?
It's a long journey. I think at OpenTable, we're at the beginning of this journey. I mean, we're part of Booking Holdings, which is a publicly traded company, and we are just starting the basic like data collection, right? Booking has the majority of our employees on the holdings level are in Europe, and so a lot of this data around race and ethnicity is just not really available outside of the US. And so like looking at it from a numbers point of view, like let's figure out what baseline is right now. So we're going that. We're doing also all the other things that a lot of Silicon Valley based companies are doing, which is unconscious bias training and looking at all of our job posts to make sure that they are inclusive in nature. So kind of the table stakes activities that a company does. We have an ERG group. We've been holding listening sessions. And so after the murder of George Floyd, we had a Black Lives Matter listening session that a lot of the people at the company dialed into and listened. And people were very vocal. Employees were very open and sharing, and we ran over time. And we held a similar listening session, for Asian Americans. And I think the shootings in Atlanta had not happened yet. It was a week or two prior to that, but there were certainly, many attacks being reported. And, we were hearing that employees were scared. Our offices are in the middle of San Francisco. There are attacks happening like a few blocks away. And during the Asian American listening session, I opened it up, to kind of show like vulnerability and speaking up and my own experience as an Asian American. And it surprised me, and in hindsight, maybe it shouldn't have, but not that many people spoke up, right? Like it was an hour session, and I think, 3 or 4 people spoke, but hundreds of people dialed in. So we had a lot of Asian Americans listening, but not necessarily comfortable talking, right? And then I came away thinking like, well, what's going on here? Is it the fact that we opened up the listening session to the entire company? Like would a better first step have been, let's keep it as, Asian American employees. So it's a closed and more safer space for people to really share how they're feeling and what they're thinking. My point in saying all of this is like, we are at the beginning of our journey, as I'm sure many companies in the US are. There's a lot more work to be done. I think the Asian American issues probably get more visibility at OpenTable by virtue of the fact that I'm an Asian American woman.
Yeah, that's heart-wrenching to think about some of the challenges you just mentioned. One last question for you, Debbie. I think as we prepared for the panel, what really struck me is that, it's often hardest to talk about and speak up for your own group. What do you think the role of allies might be here?
I think the role of allies is critical. Even as I was, giving this example at OpenTable, when we got into a room as an exec team to talk about like, how to address it, what to do, is it more education, more training? I almost felt like I couldn't be the one speaking about it, right? Because it's like, it's hitting really close to home. And for me, that relief I felt when I heard my white colleagues speak up, like, this is unacceptable, like something needs to be done, like we need to be, like we're better than this, like this is not the type of company we want to be a part of. When you have someone stand in solidarity with you, like, that's the part that actually moved me to tears when I was in that meeting, because they're saying what almost like I don't feel like I can say. So the role of allyship is so powerful. And that's like what gives me hope in all of this, as we keep hearing about the attacks and you see the news. But that, I have my white colleagues or my Black colleagues, my Latinx colleagues, my husband who's white, like that solidarity and allyship is so important, I think, in fighting this fight.
Absolutely agreed. And we'll come back to that topic at the end here, but let's turn to Deb next. And, I'll talk a little bit about leadership here, where, in our preparation, Deb, you called up the touchy-feely class for those Stanford Business School alumni on the line tonight. It's all about interpersonal dynamics. And as we look at leadership, the perceived characteristics of Asians include quiet, hardworking, self-sacrificing, also not perceived to be ambitious, or not necessarily having the soft skills to command authority. And so past efforts have been really focused on adapting leadership styles, but then people often face that double-edged sword of culturally mismatched expectations. And in fact, many women describe this double bind of adapting their leadership styles to be more masculine, and Asian women in particular have been called dragon ladies when they're too assertive relative to what's expected of them. So as you reflect back on your experience at Touchy Feely, Deb, and the career success that you've had since then, how have you navigated this double-edged sword for expectations as an Asian female leader?
Touchy-feely was a long time ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday in some ways, because, there is one class where you're supposed to touch somebody if you feel like you have some feedback to give them. And practically everyone in my group touched me. And this is back when we touched each other, and they said, it's because we just don't know how to get to know you. You just don't exist. You're different than we expected you to be. And I just really struggled with that. And I think it was because as a woman, they expected me to be more emotional, softer, gentler or something. And I just felt like I was disappointing my classmates. And I still think a lot about that and I reflect on that because as an Asian woman leader, there's so much weighting down on you. Are you aggressive enough? Are you assertive enough to stand up for your team? Are you fighting for the right things? And yet, are you doing it gently and kindly? Are you warm? Are you, there's just so many of these things, and you're navigating and threading this needle all the time. And I remember when I was young, my mother, who is a fierce woman who came to America with like a couple $100s in a suitcase to come to college. And she said, I just wish you and your sister were more demure and sweet. And I'm like, have you met the woman who raised us? She was a fierce woman. And I think our parents kind of tell us to keep our heads down and to just not be too aggressive. But in America, like, what does a successful CEO look like? I'm sure if you had to conjure up the look of what a CEO looks like, it's probably not Debbie or me. It's, and that's okay. But, for every stereotype you break, there is a cost, and there's a cost in how the mismatch feels to people, whether you're supposed to be warmer, you're supposed to be kinder, you're supposed to be gentler or something. And I think that that's really hard because those expectations weigh on you. And there is that cost, which is this mismatch actually causes people to treat you differently. And it's not something that you can easily change. And so it is something I remind everyone that what a successful leader looks like, we've defined over the last 100 years in business. And when those expectations are placed on other people, it actually is very damaging because there are leaders of many, many different types, and that we need different kinds of leadership to take us forward.
I've been doing D&I work for a very long time, and previously the work for minorities was focused on assimilation. You talk about the difference, Deb, between assimilation and adaptation. What do you see as the difference in those two terms as it relates to leadership?
I didn't want to, unlike Debbie, who drew attention to the fact that she was an Asian American, I actually went the other way. I really kind of hid the fact. I was like, if people don't notice, maybe no one will say anything. Maybe they won't comment on it. And so in a lot of ways, we actually had very divergent paths. And so at one point, I decided to write an article about my experience growing up and the feedback I was getting. And, I shared it with some people in the D&I community, and one of them wrote back in the comments, "This smacks of assimilation." And I thought so hard about it. That article is later published in court, so if you want to read it. But I read it again, and I said, yeah, assimilation is like you're giving up your culture, you're giving up what makes you special to adapt and live someone else's life. And I just kept reading it saying, is that what I'm doing? Is that what someone is accusing me of? And I struggled with it. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to rethink this. What if this is not assimilation, but adaptation? That what it takes to succeed in business in America is adapting and constantly learning and being better. And that as opposed to calling it assimilation, what if we just said, this is our way to survive, adapt, and grow? And instead, I chose the decisions I made. I didn't just sneak into it. I didn't just fall into it. I actually chose to lead the way that I felt was authentic to me. And this was authentic to me. And I published the article as is.
Yeah, that's really important, right? The authenticity of our leadership and being who it is that we truly are. What are the questions for application to Stanford Business School, or what people, places, and experience have shaped who you are today? And Deb, we talked a lot about kind of your growing up in the South and how that perhaps formed your experiences, and would love to hear a little bit about how where you grew up shaped who you are today.
Well, it's interesting. I was born in Queens also, like Dave, probably not that far away. And I grew up in a kind of a town there called Jackson Heights near Queens, in Queens. And, when I was 6 years old, my parents decided to move to the state called South Carolina that we had never even heard of. And they never told me, for years, they didn't tell us why they moved there. It's just, we went to a place where there was fewer than 1% of the population of South Carolina is Asian. And so you can imagine this family who'd never been there, moving there and living there, and what that was like. And to stick out like a sore thumb, to have people tell you, and we would go to the mall or walk down the street, and people would say, you should go back to where you came from. And I would think, New York? Like, is that what they're asking? And I was just very confused. And eventually my parents actually, we begged them to move back to New York. And my parents sat us down and said the reason they left was because my father had an engineering degree and the company he worked for refused to honor it. And they felt like it was an act of discrimination, but there was nothing they could do. And instead, they decided to work for the government because the government must honor all your degrees. And in fact, the government doesn't discriminate. And they were right. And my dad had a very successful 20-year career with the government where he retired with a full pension. But, to live in a place where nobody looks like you, where everyone would come up to you and ask to touch your hair or to, say things that are just the constant bullying. I mean, at one point we went to a church, and to this day, I'm still a Christian, but we went to a church and they turned my parents down for membership. This is a church where they sent people in missions to China. So it's okay to send missionaries from your church to China, but it's not okay to have a Chinese family amongst your congregation. So we stopped being Southern Baptist and we became Presbyterians, where we stayed in the Presbyterian church for the rest of our time there. And it's really hard to kind of explain even to my kids who grew up in a place where we live in Palo Alto near Stanford. And there's a place where it's like a third of their school is Asian, right? And they're like, it would be, my husband keeps trying to convince me to go back and take the kids back. And I'm like, I don't want to go back because it was just such a difficult way of growing up. And it's so hard for them to understand because they just live in a place that's so different. They're like, why would people say stuff like that to you? But, this wasn't an isolated incident. And even to this day, I lived a couple of years in Atlanta and several of my friends still live there. And they said, their kids are still told that, it's their fault that there's a virus, and I really struggle with what it's like to continue to live in a community where you feel like you're always the other. And, I think that that's the one big challenge that we have as an Asian community is I think they call it the forever foreigner. The other, you're always going to be different. You're always going to look different and people will always comment on it. And it's always going to be this one thing about you. And that's the most important thing about you. And yet all of us have so many different interests and lives and stories. And yet, it becomes a caricature or a stereotype of who you are instead of who you actually are.
Yeah, the forever other. It's really interesting to think about, the fact that what it feels like to be an outsider. And it's only now that so many of us are reflecting back to some of those really painful childhood stories and thinking to share them with each other. In some ways, being vulnerable doesn't necessarily, maybe it runs counter, right, to Asian culture. And I'm curious, Deb, you talked a little bit about how you're reconnecting with folks on just these shared personal stories. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that before we turn to Q&A.
the stories I just shared, I really never told that many people. And after the incident in Atlanta, I really felt the need to I emailed a bunch of my friends I grew up with, and I said, hey, this is what happened. And they shared a lot of stories too of what happened to them. And these are people who grew up in the South as well. And I realized that like none of us had ever even talked to each other about this, much less other people, that we always just thought it was us, that maybe us, if we were just a little less objectionable, if it was just like we were just a little bit, easier to get along with, then maybe no one will comment if nobody noticed. And so for me, being the opposite of Debbie, I hid from this. I didn't want to be the Asian leader. I didn't want to, and I purposely did not ever really participate that much in the Asian student associations or associate that much, because I figured maybe if no one notices, no one will care. And yet when I shared those stories and I saw those stories come back from my friends who I grew up with, went to college with, and I heard the kind of pain that they went through too, I realized that we're not alone. And so I actually posted both on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, like 3 million people read what I wrote, I think, or something like that. And it was really just a moment to say, you know what, we had these experiences. And so many people reached out to me afterwards, sharing their stories, that I published on my Substack a lot of these stories that I had never really told anyone about the church, about, my father, and how that really shaped my growing up. But I do think that vulnerability is really hard. That's why the touchy-feely class was very, very difficult, because I never let that guard down. And I just never let anyone in, because it was just a lot easier that way.
Yeah, and how important it is for leaders in the community to start sharing those stories. So thank you for doing that. It's definitely not the easiest thing to do, and I'll certainly appreciate it. I know, and I'm noticing that we have about 10 minutes left for the session, and I'm wanting to turn to Adrian and ask if there are some good questions coming in from the audience.
Thanks, Tina. Yeah, we have tons of questions, and I will apologize in advance. There's no way we're going to answer all of them. We know that dozens of you submitted questions before as well. One thing that I definitely wanted to touch on was there were tons of questions submitted around how do we get the next generation of Asian leadership to the C-suite? And maybe we go around the three panelists, and Dave, maybe you can start. And there's two kind of frames of the way in which people would love to hear this. One is, what's your number one piece of advice if you're an Asian American starting out in your career today? Or two, what are you personally doing to kind of cultivate that next generation of leadership, opening the door behind you? And choose to answer one, the second one, or both.
Sure. So unlike Deb and Debbie, I decided not to fight the fight and try to break the bamboo ceiling, and I'm glad that they did. I don't think I was wired that way. I don't think, there are some folks just aren't wired that way. I wrote an essay after actually hearing Denise and Buck present the information, like the data in the Silicon Valley, that Asians aren't promoted to executive levels the way that other races are. And the two companies that there were, people were pointing out on parity with other races were Pinterest and NVIDIA, both with Asian American CEOs. And when I read that, I thought to myself, like, why are we even bothering trying to fight this fight? And I think we should, but I'm taking a different tack, and I'm trying to encourage people to start their own houses instead of trying to break the bamboo ceiling. Build your own house, because you don't have to fight this fight. You can prove yourself. You don't have to. It's maybe an uphill battle for fundraising, but that's what I'm trying to change with Hyphen. But every step of the way, we're going to be having a context switch and go into a room that, like, when Debbie said, no one looks like us. The people who are gatekeepers to the Capitol, they don't look like us. They're automatically, from the first second they meet you, they're sizing you up, and all the stereotypes and baggage they're putting on you, and you have to break out of that. So you're starting from square one, steps behind other people. And so for me, it's, the fact that when I see, Debbie becoming an exec at OpenTable and then promoting other Asian Americans in the C-suite, how many more, companies like OpenTable can we have that we start on our own, that we don't have to worry about that? We can promote, Asian women, we can promote Black women, we can promote Hispanic men, like, LGBT, like that. We all have had to hide and suppress who we are, and, like I said before, censor who we are to fit into the narrative of, the white patriarchy that runs a lot of the, the country. And, if it's us running the show, we get to call the shots. So if that's the case, then we don't have to, continue to kind of push and fight against the friction of those who don't want to promote us. The same thing, I mean, the boards around the country are predominantly white male for a reason. They who their friends are, who they go to their country club with, they're inviting their other friends who've been on boards, you know, to join them on the board. And the only way to get on the board is if you have board experience. And most of them are other white males who have board experience. So it's going to be impossible to break into that unless you have the CEO and founders of the company who are, you know, people of color who invite others, and it matters to them what the board looks like. You know, board construction is all about who the leadership wants to bring on to the company. And so the more DoorDashes and the more Zooms we have, you know, the better. And I think the biggest challenge for me, and I know we only have 10 minutes, but I think that there would be more women and people of color ringing the bell on Wall Street when they go public if at early stages they can actually get capital. But we can't, because, you know, we don't have parents who support us in breaking out of our, you know, we went to Ivy League schools, we went to Stanford, we got our jobs, we're at Google, and then we quit. Most parents don't even talk to you anymore. I have founders I've backed that their parents have disowned them because they did that. You know, it's horrible. But we don't have trust funds. We're still paying school loans probably. We still have to pay our rent. We don't have a bucket of cash from our, you know, private equity buddies from our Princeton eating clubs. Like, none of this stuff is coming to us for free. Like, we have to take a risk, and it costs us money. So if I can somehow pool enough money to cut a check to a founder who I know can do this, then even $100,000 will make all the difference. And I've had folks who actually took my website, sent it to their parents, show them the pictures of people like Deb and Debbie, and say, look, we actually have people who are Asian who've done, you know, who are successful, that done this. It's not that bad to do this. And then, you know, basically, you know, people saying, oh, Dave, you assembled the Asian Avengers to support, you know, this community. But by having those Avengers on that page to show their parents, I'm actually getting the parents to support them and not disown them. So again, there's the one path of resistance, which I am very appreciative to my sisters here for fighting. I'm going the other path of saying, you know what, I'm going to create a whole new track that we can build more and more companies that are led by Asian American founders, and that they can change the game that way. So I think both are important.
I love that, Dave. Deb, maybe a perspective from the other path for balance, I guess.
Sure, I'll be quick. I think it's to answer both of your questions. The first piece is, you know, piece of advice on how to navigate. There is still value in putting your head down and doing really good work, because that does build credibility, right? So I always, you know, when I talk to folks who are just starting off in their career, it's like, do every task with relish, like do it as, you know, even the really mundane things that are not fun, that's important. And then also, don't be afraid to speak up and ask. That's like really the main thing, like ask for that project, ask for that promotion, ask, you know, the worst you can get, the thing, you know, is a no. And for me, it's always been, well, how do I turn that no into a yes, right? And that's what's really important. And to your second question, as you know, I have demonstrated, I pull the other people of color, the other women along with me, and not even so much. And it's actually, that's actually not accurate. It's that the women that I work with, that I'm fortunate enough to work with, the people I work with, some of them happen to be Asian women, have helped me get to where I am. Like, I wouldn't be here without them. So, you know, it's this virtuous cycle. To Dave's point, you know, you look at companies that have, you know, Asian CEOs or women CEOs, and shockingly, like, you look at the, you know, their exec teams or people who make up their company, and those companies tend to be more diverse. So those are the two pieces of advice I would give on how to fight the fight the other way.
And I would just add one last thing, which is I get asked for advice a lot. And I ended up, I write a Substack, but I also am writing a book, which basically will feature amazing women. Hopefully Debbie will say yes to, I asked her to join, but basically it tells a story of amazing women who have fought the good fight. And Christine Tsai from 500 Startups, who's a CEO, you know, Abigail Nguyen, who's now a producer, but she wrote a best-selling book while she was working in AI and Intel, just like amazing women who have fought the good fight and actually found allies and made it, and how they made it. And the book is actually called Take Back Your Power. And it's really about, you know, there will be moments where you don't feel like asking, where you want to lean back. And, you know, and instead you should say, you know what, this is the time to lean forward. And I write it as a labor of love, not for my job, but I do it because so many women ask me these questions over and over, and I wish I had this manual. And so I hope someday that, we will be able to, this is no longer an issue. But until then, our job is to continue to pay it forward however we can. And on the board thing, and just on touching on what Dave said, I joined the board of Intuit in 2017, and nobody ever reached out to me before that. And then the minute I joined that board, I'd been there for 15 minutes. I got like dozens of asks. And I was so confused because I wasn't good enough the day before, and I was better than everybody else the day after, and I hadn't changed at all. So I actually keep my own board list, and I recommend women, particularly minority women and people of color, to boards, because I get asked a lot, and I hope they will pick some of these people. And so far so good. I've gotten a couple on boards, and but it's just something that you continue to do. You pay forward because so many opportunities, but we don't have access to the old boys network. And so we decided to create our own. I guess is the joke that we had. And so I do see there's so much talent that's being wasted that could be helping these companies, could be investing, could be doing so much more. And so I hope all of us will continue to pay it forward and be great allies.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. And I just want to wrap up by, reading a couple of terms that we talked about, which I think are quite interesting and inspiring. I think authentic leadership and being ourselves, opening up to be vulnerable and sharing our stories, taking activism as an approach to really sharing the story more broadly as leaders, being visible role models, and really showing our true selves out there, as well as paying forward and really helping future leaders climb the ladder, whether that's through the corporate ranks or starting their own organizations through venture funding. So with that, would like to turn it back over to you, Denise, to wrap up the session here.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you so much to all the panelists tonight for joining in. You're just, your authenticity and insights were really, really appreciated. And I really appreciate the excellent moderation and facilitation by Tina and Adrian. I'm sorry we didn't get around to all the questions, but obviously there's a lot of appetite for that. So maybe we'll do another panel soon. From all of us at the Asian Alumni Chapter Leadership Team, we thank everyone for joining in tonight, and we hope that you all enjoyed and got something out of this webinar. Please, everybody, stay safe wherever you are, stay healthy, and stay positive. Goodbye.